Okay, well, it is my profound pleasure to be here with my dear friend, Judy Bolton Fasman, and member of our shul, who I have prayed with for many years, but have never before had the blessing of reading her words in a book because this is her debut book. She has written articles for many years that many of us have followed and have found her to be wise and insightful. But this book is a whole new level of sharing. And Judy, that's really what you did. You shared your heart and your soul through this book. So I want to ask you a few questions about this book. The first really about the title itself, which is so evocative. Judy, you called this book Asylum. What does
Mhm.
that mean for you?
Briefly, before I answer that question, I just want to thank you, Rabbi Robinson, for being such a empathetic, careful, and loving reader and supportive reader. And thank you for all your years of support to me. It's an honor to be in conversation with you. And I want to thank everybody who came out this morning. It's a Sunday morning, and it's a beautiful day, and I really appreciate you being at your computers, um, listening to me talk with Rabbi Robinson. So you want to know about the title Asylum. The title was a gift from the universe. And what I mean by that is I grew up at 1735 Asylum Avenue in West Hartford, Connecticut. So that is actually the name of my childhood street. Asylum, for those of you who've traveled, on the way to New York on I-84, you'll see exit 48, Asylum Street. That is the asylum street that I lived on, about 3 miles up into the suburb of West Hartford, Connecticut. So there's that literal meaning that I grew up on asylum. There is the connotation of refugee. Although my mother, who is from Cuba, immigrated to the United States, the rest of the family came over after Castro's takeover of the island and were literally refugees. That was their initial status in this country. They were refugees, and as a side note, they were supported and shepherded to this country by Hias. So we have a Hias story in my family, and they were very integral in helping my family settle in the United States. And then it was a complicated family. My family was complicated. There was some mental illness. There was some for lack of a better word, and I use this very generically, so there was some craziness, and asylum has that connotation as well. So, it's sort of a confluence of those 3 points.
Mm, wow, that I love the multiple levels and the multiple meanings that you bring. So before we dive into this book, I actually wanted to talk first about the page that comes before the story. I
Hmm.
want to talk to you about the quotes that
Hmm.
you chose, and one of them is comes from a non-Jewish source, the other two from Jewish sources. I was particularly struck by your very first quote that you chose from Maya Angelou, and that was, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." You've often spoken about how this is your first debut at the age of 60. Can you share with us how you relate to this quote of the untold story inside of you?
Yeah, it actually does relate to my debut at 60, and it relates to being a woman who had years and years of stories accumulate inside of her. Um, and while I was always writing, and in some ways this isn't my first book, there have been sort of false starts. There's an unpublished book of short stories that was my thesis. This is an accumulation of a lifetime, and there were so many untold stories. There were stories that I would think about as I drove carpool. There were stories that I would think about as I was making dinner. I think that quote honors the women who don't have the time yet to write down their stories. But If anything, being, finally publishing this book at 60, I hope that it's an inspiration to women to keep making their art. It's never too late to make your art, and it's never too late to dream. Keep dreaming. Your dreams don't have an expiration date.
Mm. Well, given that it is the season for the idea that our dreams do not have an expiration date, talk to us about the next two quotes that you chose. And if you want to read them from
Yeah, let me
that
do it.
that pre-title page,
Mhm.
one is from the Ethics of Our Fathers from Pirkei Avot, and the other from the extraordinary Israeli poet Zelda.
Turn it and turn it again, for everything is in it. I think that this book took me a long time to write, and I had a lot of starts. I don't want to call them false starts because those starts contributed in their own way to how I eventually shaped and told the story. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in that in that quote about the revision process. I think I chose it because I thought it was very appreciative of our ancestors to sort of describe the revision process that went on while I was writing this book. So that quote really spoke to me. And for the second one, each of us has a name given to us by God and given to us by our father and mother. Um, I love Zelda, and any chance I can get to promote Zelda, I do. But this quote in particular spoke to me because of my name. I am named after a relative that my father loved very much, who I eventually found out turned out to be very important in his life. And it's also, we all have names, and I, was exquisitely aware of my name during the year I said the Kaddish. I was Yehudi Bat Akiva Herschel. And or when I was, or if, somebody was praying for me, I am Yehudi Bat Mazal Tov, which is an unusual Jewish name, Hebrew name for a woman, but my mother is Sephardic, and that is actually her Hebrew name. And so names were swirling all around me all my life, and I was just really interested in them.
Mm.
My mother's maiden name was Albuquerque, and she always said she was descendant from the Duke of Albuquerque. So the names were very, really, really made an impression on me from an early age. And everybody has a name, everybody has names, everybody acts to their names at various points in their life, different points in their life. So I wanted to sort of point that out in the title page.
And you go deeper with that as you begin your story, and you tell us that you really identified your name in English with Judy Bolton, Girl Detective. So, can you tell us a little bit about why you felt so much affinity with this character of Judy Bolton, girl detective, and speak more about the role that that character played in shaping your own identity, as well
Mhm.
as your own approach to this book, writing it not only as a memoir about your family, but as a mystery.
Yes. Well, I'll never forget the time I first saw that name on the Book of a Spine. I was about 6 years old, and to see my name on the Book of a Spine was just absolutely thrilling. There was actually to see it, Judy Bolton in large type, was a thrill. Everybody has a role that they're assigned in their family. And my role was that I was very, for lack of a better word, I was nosy. I was curious. I wanted to know about my family. I wanted to know about my parents. My parents were very mysterious figures to me. So the persona just fit perfectly. And I always thought of myself as a detective, even, as a young child. Of course, that evolved over the years as I grew up, and I was always very interested in family stories. And as you know, you read the book. I have a very colorful, different family, and that's just fertile ground for a writer and for someone who is just intensely curious about family stories, because family stories are really what make us and ground us. So Judy Bolton, Girl Detective, also fit because as I found out, I started investigating the mystery that my father held all his life. and actually died with the secret. So he sort of propelled me, his memory rather propelled me to find out more about him and what that mystery was all about.
Mm. So, speaking about your father's mystery, there's a lot of pathos and darkness and pain really there in what is unknown about his story as well as what is known. And on page 13, you speak about a Spanish noun that
Mm-hmm.
literally means, sorry, page 13 of the prologue.
Right.
You speak about a Spanish noun that means the equivalent of a storage room, but your family uses it as a metaphor about hidden spaces in the
Mm-hmm.
souls. And you use it to speak about your father's hidden secrets. And yet you say it reflects more broadly. So I'd like to invite you to read this passage. And then I'm going to ask you a question about how you think that reflects to the secret spaces that we're all keeping, particularly at this time as we come to Yom Kippur, and we're all asked to stand before God, the knower of secrets.
Um, where would you like me to
On
start?
page 13, if you want to begin right in the middle.
Okay, yep, I see it, and I've got to change glasses briefly. Oh, maybe I don't have the glasses here. I thought I did. Ah, yes, I do. I have to put on reading glasses because I am a literary debutante at 60. Um, okay. Trastienda is a Spanish noun that literally means a storage room in the back of a warehouse. I imagine it as a place to stash broken dreams. It is like the small storage room in the basement of my childhood home, where orphaned books and bygone art projects were, as my father would say, with his penchant for tried and true expressions, to put out to pasture. This letter, I'll just contextualize a
Keep
little
going.
bit. This letter, and I'm talking about a letter that my father sent me when I was very young and asked me to burn. This letter might be telling me that my father no longer had dreams to comfort him. After all, a trastienda is a dark, dank place, and this letter carried a whiff of that because no one's trastiendas were more hidden away than those of my parents. If my father were to confess his, surely it would be in a missive as large and securely bound as this one. Secrets had always saturated the air in the house. They rustled in drawers, were stashed in closets, often alluded to yet never spoken. I felt them, stumbled over them. Secreticos, 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 my mother said, a dire if vague warning.
So tell us about these secrets and this hidden spot in the soul.
Well, I think we all have them. I think that they're all that we have secreticos and trastiendas embedded in our soul. In my family, it it felt particularly notable to me, even as a young child. My parents were very different people, and there was an age difference, a cultural difference, and in that chasm, I was I didn't have the words then to articulate it, but as I grew older, I did articulate that I felt that there were secrets that shaped them as individuals, and secrets that shaped their marriage, and secrets that sort of were the undercurrent in the house. So that was really, that's what propelled me actually to be a writer, was to um, was to plumb those secrets and interrogate them, um, which I did, which I've been doing all my life.
And when you think about the process that we're undergoing at this time of
Hmm.
year, right? It's very much a process that you went through in this book to try to open up some of the doors of those hidden spaces. What were some of the pitfalls, some of the dangers that happened for you, both emotionally and practically in uncovering some of these secrets or even opening the door to ask the questions? And what are some of the helpful things that moved your soul forward?
Well, when you write a book like this, you're going to inevitably anger somebody. And I tried. to be as delicate as I could in writing in the material that I chose, and I actually left out some material that I thought would upset some of my relatives. So the pitfalls are that you might anger someone, you might um, to the point that maybe they won't talk to you. For a while, I had a family member that didn't talk to me, and it was very important to me to appease her and to make her feel comfortable. So I took out just a few sentences that I knew she was very uncomfortable about my grandfather, and I went ahead and did that because I love her, and it was more important to me that she feel comfortable and at peace with what I was doing. Um, my sister has is uncomfortable a little bit with the book, but she has been 100%, 1,000% supportive and very proud. But it wasn't always easy to tell the story, which she rightfully considers our story. So those sort of those are sort of the dangers of being a memoirist. Anne Lamott, a very famous memoirist and writer, said, if people didn't want to be, I'm wildly paraphrasing this, but if people didn't want to appear, badly behaved in your stories, they should have been better people to you, or they should have behaved better. I used to think that, I really did. And for a long time, I sort of felt, I have the right, this is my story. But then I sort of stood back and took a step back and evolved about that, thinking that people do the best they can. And I don't want to be vengeful, and I don't want my writing to be vengeful, because that's not going to serve me, that's not going to serve my subjects, and it's not going to serve my readers. So I was very cautious about feeling vengeful. And I really went over the book a lot in the latter years that I worked on it. I worked on this book for 12 years, um, and tried to come with the spirit of empathy. And I think your second part of your question was, did the secrets,
Yeah,
what,
what was helpful about, what was generative? What enriched
ah
your life?
well, there was kind of the aha moment, and I thought, of course, that's why my father was quirky and, you know, quiet and, very stalwart. Of course, he had all of these secrets. He had the secrets of a country, in his back, on his back. And it also quite frankly helped me understand my mother a bit more. Um, why she, what her dreams that were sort of waylaid, um, why they were waylaid, and what that did to her.
Mm, mm. So one of the challenges in moving through our lives is how we are going to interact with other people's secrets. And you begin your story and you end it with an envelope, a literal envelope sent to you by your father. And on a literary level, you also sort of frame the entire story as an envelope, because you begin and you end in the same place, but you're a very different person. Can you talk to us about the role that Kaddish played in helping you get from that first envelope to the envelope at the end with a very different approach?
I think my understanding of Kaddish changed. When I first started writing the book, it was solely about Kaddish, and then it evolved with a story arc once I started investigating my father. Kaddish not only gave me the story arc, it gave me meaning. At first, I thought Kaddish is really selfish. It's like a Valentine to a god who doesn't care that you have some that you're grieving. This is a god that just wants magnification and sanctification for themselves, and it angered me. And over the years, as I researched Kaddish and read about it and read different commentators, I realized that God is not being selfish. God is not asking for the glory. God is with us and is grieving with us. And that was a huge that was a huge insight for me, and it helped me to it helped me to understand my grief. It helped me to understand God in the grieving process, and that opened up so much for me. So Kaddish is extremely important to me. It in some ways it marked my return to Judaism. I sort of had a very checkered past with Judaism, as I write in the book, and I loved that now in the conservative movement, or now in my day, women could say Kaddish. I mean, it seems like it's a no-brainer, but it wasn't a no-brainer 50, 60 years ago. Um, Women didn't say Kaddish, and I was honored that I could take on that role and set aside space and time and energy and love for my father daily. That was very important to me. Kaddish was like a conversation with him. So Kaddish was had a huge impact on my posthumous relationship with him, and I would say in my relationship with him in general, because you never stop having a relationship with your dad. You're always in relationship with your dad, and that helped me to continue the relationship, to grow the relationship, and to appreciate the relationship even more.
Mm. Now, Temple Emmanuel was
Oh.
your daily home for you, as you said, Kaddish. Can you describe the minyan that you attended here and how it felt for you, how community supported your work of working through the secrets of your past and having that beautiful conversation that you just shared now with your father?
Well, first of all, I have to give a shout out to Dan Nesson. He is at the Daily Minion almost every night, and he is very dedicated. He is very supportive. He was very kind, and he really was an integral part of that experience for me, because Dan was always there. He was steadfast. He was supportive. So a shout out to our Dan Nesson for his for the way he the atmosphere he creates in the Minion. I met friends there. I'm still friends with people that were saying the Kaddish with me. I learned how to pray there. I had forgotten how to pray. I'm still not much of a prayer kind of person. I don't always pray. I sort of like when I go to shul, I sort of like to think about things rather than actually do a minion, or actually do the prayer. Um, but I learned to pray there. I learned things about the choreography, and I actually learned how to conduct the Ma'arif prayer service, which seems like a simple thing, but it wasn't a simple thing for me. And Dan actually recorded it for me, and I would listen to it in my car, and it opened up a world to me. It opened up a world that I was capable of prayer, and I was capable of benefiting from it. And I wasn't sure that I always was, because as I first write in the book, I didn't think I was going to do the Kaddish for more than 30 days. My father died 2 days before Rosh Hashanah. He was buried on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I thought I'll do the first 30 days. And then all of a sudden, I realized it was Thanksgiving, and I was still going to Minyan. So that was, and I think that says a lot about the community that Temple Emmanuel created for me.
Mm. You said that you researched the history of women saying Kaddish. What was the most surprising thing you learned?
Um, I loved the Henrietta Souls story. Henrietta Souls is the founder of Hadassah, and she studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And she was, I believe, the oldest of 8 daughters. In any event, she had 7 sisters. There were no brothers to say the Kaddish for her father in the early 1900s, in the early part of the century. And she had a friend, I believe a professor at JTS, who said he would take on the mitzvah, the commandment of saying the Kaddish for her father for her. And she wrote him back a beautiful letter saying, "No, I don't want anyone to take on that mitzvah but me. I am his daughter, and I will do it." And she did do it. And I found that really inspiring and prescient and anticipating, considering the fact that she was a founder of Hadassah, considering the role of women and what it could become. I mean, she saw the potential of the role of women of Judaism. And sure enough, here we are in the, 21st century. And I'm speaking to my rabbi who is a woman. And I can tell you that 30 years ago, we were still not as evolved because at my husband's synagogue, where we had for a conservative synagogue, I was that women were only allowed to bless the Torah one Shabbat a month, and the Shabbat that we had the Yofref was not that Shabbat, and I was furious because I thought, why can't I go up with my beloved and bless the Torah? And all they would give me to kind of appease me was the chance to say Ashrei, like I was kind of a bat mitzvah girl. So and that's not the case anymore at that synagogue. And I think women have just come a long way, and sometimes we because things are so good for us in so many ways in Judaism, in conservative and liberal branches of Judaism, we forget that we didn't always have the active role that we have now.
Mm. So, speaking of being active in Jewish life, one of the customs that we have in our minyan is at 11 months, we will often invite people who are mourning to share the story of the person that they've been saying Kaddish for the past 11 months.
Mhm.
And it seems to me your book, in some ways, you said it took you 12 years. Right? So it's a marker in that way of sharing the story of your father who you were mourning for, the story of your family. And yet normally when we give these sort of talks, we focus on the good, the positive that we can say, and we sort of spin a story of what's best of those who we have been blessed to have as our parents. And you took a different path as a memoirist of really trying to dig down to find what was real, whether it was um, flattering or unflattering. Can you share a little bit about the emotional process of sharing so openly about your complicated family?
Well, I have to tell you, when I got the book contract, um, I was terrified. I wasn't sure. It took me, a week or two to think about whether I really wanted to publish the book. Of course, I wanted publication, I wanted recognition, but it wasn't such a simple thing for me. But I thought as long as I told the truth, I would be okay. And I think I read in the acknowledgments that my parents did the best they could, and I'm glad they were my parents. I wouldn't be me without them. Um, so that in all their complications and all of their messy emotional dynamics, I mean that's who I am, and I've always been a sharer because I think writers share. I think that's one of the parts of the profession, and I've always written personal essays. I first started out life as a fiction writer, and my fiction, as with most young writers who write fiction, was heavily autobiographical. So I was always in sharing in sharing mode, and that was how I made my art. Other people make their art differently, and I absolutely respect that. But I sort of subscribe to the wonderful late Natalia Ginsburg, who is a Italian writer who wrote beautiful novellas and novels and personal essays. Everything we write is a little bit autobiographical. We're human. We're humans making art, and there can't help but be a touch of the autobiographical in everything we do. So I think that's part of the human condition, and it's certainly for me, in my experience, part of being a writer.
Mm. Well, one of the more evocative stories, although there are a number here in this book that you bring, certainly one that really jumped out at me was at the end of chapter 3, where you speak about yourself and your siblings as sort of following your father like ducks and going to feed the ducks in the process. And you speak about that as a kind of a tashlich. And here we are at the high holidays, having just done tashlich. And I'd love to invite you to share this passage. And then I have a question about it for you.
Okay, I'll give a little bit of context. It's been a rough Sunday afternoon. Sundays were hard in my house, um, and my father sort of always got us out of the house when it was, weather permitting. I mean, we grew up in Connecticut, and he took us always to feed the ducks. And so the three of us went with him to feed the ducks, and that was a very big part of our childhood. Was kind of going to this pond on the grounds of the school for the American School for the Deaf in West Hartford. So I'll just read very briefly. The word tashlich, the Hebrew word tashlich, literally means to cast off and refers to the symbolic and communal ceremony performed on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The point is to purge the previous year's sins, represented in the pieces of bread thrown into a body of water. Verses from the prophet Micah, recited during Tashlich, portray a forgiving, loving God, ready to receive our apologies. You do not maintain anger forever, but you delight in loving kindness. You will again have compassion upon us, subduing our sins, casting all our sins into the depths of the sea. I threw chunks of poppy seed roll into the water and recited the litany of my sins in the hope that God would forgive me. For the sin of laughing, for the sin of setting the table the wrong way, for the sin of flushing my vitamins down the toilet, for the sin of having common brown eyes, for the sin of being born.
So, this juxtaposition of this healing ritual of tashlich and the pain that you're carrying. And in the previous paragraph, you spoke about the way in which you were feeding the ducks, sort of as ducks, and your mother had just thrown a curse. My mother's curse, go drown with the ducks, is ringing in your ears. Talk to us about the role of a Jewish frame in helping you find a sense of stability, a sense of possibility, and ultimately a sense of healing for these pains.
Excuse me. I think that, at the time I didn't have the words and I didn't know that I was doing tashlich, but it was very much a tashlich. I was trying to throw off the pain. And when you're a child, you're very connected to your parents. Your parents are your whole world. My mother was my whole world. And, there were beautiful moments I had with her when we went shopping in downtown Hartford. And then there were also very traumatic, hard moments I had with her because she was essentially unhappy a lot of the time. And that was one afternoon that I portray here that she was unhappy. So I think I was doing Tashlich not only to heal myself, but to heal her. There was nothing more I wanted when I was a child than to make her happy and to help her wipe away her tears. So um, I think that tashlich ceremony, excuse me, that impromptu tashlich ceremony that I performed was from the heart, was very organic, and it was not just for me, but it was for my mother as well.
Mm, mm. So, at the close of your book, it feels like you really have found a sense of peace. And I want to ask, your book leaves the reader with so many questions. And I want to ask you, how did you get to that sense of peace? And has it persisted?
Yes, I do have a sense of peace. There are some questions unanswered, but I think of my book as a book of facts, and I'm very forward about this in the book. I'm very forthright in saying that it's also a book of creative nonfiction speculation. There's a lot of speculation, so I think mixing the facts with speculation for me yielded an unshakable truth, a deep truth that I know is the right truth. So that's where I derive my sense of peace from.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks, Judy. I'm going to invite, if there's anybody on this talk who would like to ask a question of your own for Judy, we have time for one or two questions from people who have joined us today. And then I'm going to ask a final question. Anybody like to ask a question? You can raise your hand. Is that Janie? Are you just moving around there or?
Well, first of all, Judy, I'm so proud of you. You know, we've been friends for so many years and raised our children together in Schechter and Temple Emmanuel. And you invited me to say Kaddish for my father so that I wouldn't be alone, because you were already having that practice for your own father a few weeks before that. And it was just so special to share that with you. But we also share a Hispanic background, and I'm just wondering what part of the flavor of having that Hispanic background do you feel is very powerful from your book? And also, I'm just curious to, get a sense from you, like, what are your children's reactions to this powerful journey for you and accomplishment?
Okay, that's a two-parter, and I'll take the first part about the Latinx identity. You know, when I many years ago when I went to London, my father's hero was Winston Churchill, and there was a quote in one of the museum exhibits that I went to about Churchill, where he said, you know, his mother was an American and his father was British, and he said, although I'm half American and half British, I feel all British. I think that wavered for me. You know, like sometimes I was all like my dad's, American, and sometimes I was all my mother's Latinx identity. Her Latinx identity has had a profound effect on me. It has shaped my identity. It is who I am. She gave me a second language. She gave me a Sephardic heritage. So that has always moved me. There's a lot of Spanish words in my book intentionally because Spanish was such a profound gift and a profound language for me, as was Ladino. I don't know Ladino, but I remember my mother speaking it with her sister and her mother, and it was very, and I loved sort of understanding it but not understanding it because it sort of sounded like Spanish but it wasn't really Spanish. So language in general plays a really important part, and my, as you know, Janny, the Latinx identity, because we've been friends for so long, has been very important to me, and is very important to me. And my children are now grown, Anna and Adam, and they they love the book, and they are proud, and they just, in fact, it's funny, the other night the book was launched at Porter Square Books virtually, and Anna participated in the launch by giving a toast at the end of the book, and she wrote about how she watched me over the years write the book, and what an impression that made on her, and how she noticed how careful I was with craft and with words and with ideas, and um, how she loved watching that process, and how she appreciated that her childhood was quite a bit different than mine. So I think that my kids, they're old enough now to understand why I wrote the book, and how it affected me, and to have their own impressions of it.
Mm.
Thank you.
Michelle, I have a question,
Anne,
Judy. Hi, this is Ann Johnson. How are you? It's very nice.
Oh,
I
Anne, how are
wonder.
you?
I was so excited when I found out you'd written this book, by the way. I only managed to get my hands on it about a week ago, so I haven't read it. But just based on the conversation that you've been having today, one of my questions is, it appears that this is also at least semi-biographical about both of your parents. And my question to you is that you have expressed a great deal of responsibility for the living in your relationship to having written this book. You have also put in writing the story, the biography, the life of two individuals. How does it affect you in terms of knowing that essentially in some ways you actually have, taken their life and made it what you say that it is in a very large sense. Where does your responsibility, and how do you feel about your responsibility in doing that really as a biographer, as much as somebody who's writing memoir?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel a huge sense of responsibility. Um, I also feel that their story very much informs my story, and that their roles in it are very much my story. And it gave me a license, if you will, to write it. Um, as you know, Anne, you're a great reader, and you know that I'm not the first person, nor will I be the last person to write a memoir about family. And I thought long and hard. As I said, when I first got the book contract, I was terrified. Um, and but as I've been promoting the book, and as people have read it and reacted to it, I'm proud of the permission that I've given them to think about their own family stories, and to and to come to terms with who their relatives were. So I'm hoping that it's a beacon for people as much as it is my story.
So with that, I will ask my final question, which is the really a question on behalf of all of us. In just a few days, we're going to be standing, pounding our chests as we come before God, who is the knower of secrets and the one who contains all mysteries, and writes each of our stories and seals them, inscribes them in the books that we imagine up on high. And so I want to ask you now to reflect on if there's one thing that we could bring from your experience, either writing this book or from the content of the book itself, that could help us to think through who we are in relationship to our families as we come and stand before God on the holiest of our days. What would that be?
For a long time, I didn't really talk about my family or my parents. There was a certain sense of shame. I was different. They were different. And I think that I've come to appreciate their struggles and who they were. And I would say that, this Yom Kippur, as I've done on every Yom Kippur since since thinking about my parents in this way, um, I've come to see them as a blessing in my life. I mean, um, they've given me cultures, they've given me a sense of who I am, they've given me an identity, and yeah, they have given me much pain, but and they've given me much joy, and that pain and that joy have shaped me and have helped me cope with difficulties in life. I mean, that's one of the things that my kids have observed in me, is a certain resiliency. I'd like to think I'm resilient. I don't always feel resilient, but I'd like to think that they shaped my resiliency as well.
And so in making that gift that you have received through this, one thing that we could take away today from your experience that we could apply to ours.
You're more resilient than you think you are. I think that people think they're not as resilient as they think they are, and people are incredibly strong and incredibly resilient, and there is a wellspring of compassion and healing within us. And I don't always perfectly access it, but I'm aware that I can access it, and I think that awareness is really helpful.
Amen. Well, Judy, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
spending this morning sharing with us about your book, and being so open and so honest. And we are so blessed to be able to go through this experience this morning with you. But we also want to bless you. I want to bless you that you should continue to find strength and joy and inspiration and resilience in writing the story of your family and making it the story of your life. May you be inscribed in the book of life for good and sealed for endless blessing that ripples through the generations for many, 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 many more years to come. And for this, we all say, everyone's join me.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you
Amen.
so much, Rabbi Robinson, and thank you all for
Amen.
coming and being such
Fabulous.
thoughtful readers and supporters. Thank you.